The following video is a non-profit soundtrack review. Street Fighter III Third Strike is property of Capcom. Support the official release. Also, this video has mild language, so you've been warned. 3, 2, 1.
Prepare for an eternity of me kicking your ass.
What up, world? It's your boy, DJ BK Mr. What up, world? It's DJ BK Mr. Arcadio back again with a brand new episode of the Arcadio Radio Reviews. In this video, we are going to be talking about the soundtrack, all 3 different versions of the soundtrack to Street Fighter III Third Strike, one of the most hypest Street Fighter games to hit the market with one of the most killer soundtrack to hit fighting games ever. But before we get into that, I would like for you to smash that like button down below because it really helps me out. Also, to subscribe to Arcadio because we got lots more coming down the road, baby. Also, comment down in below and tell me which is your favorite Street Fighter soundtrack. Do you like the originals from Street Fighter 2? Are you a fan of Street Fighter 3? And which one? Third Strike, Second Impact, the original? Tell you the truth, I don't even recall the original soundtrack to Street Fighter 3. Or is there another fighting game franchise that you favor that has soundtrack that just gets you amped up? Let me know in the comments below, and who knows, it may wind up in the next Arcadio Radio Review. Now let me ask you a question. When it comes to fighting games, what do you mostly think about?
I'm gonna kick his ass.
Kick your ass. I'm gonna kick your ass.
Okay, yeah, but what else do you think about?
I'm about to whip somebody's ass.
Alright, but what about the
I wanna kick your ass until your head falls off.
Okay, clearly the music in fighting games can be somewhat forgettable. But there are lots of great fighting game soundtracks that have come out over the recent years, ranging from Soul Edge to Guilty Gear to Killer Instinct. I mean, seriously, Rare came out with Killer Cuts, which was a soundtrack promo CD that came out with the console edition of Killer Instinct for the Super Nintendo. And I still jam out to it sometimes.
It's the way you...
However, we are going to take a look at the raging demon of fighting game soundtracks. One that made an uppercut above the rest and pile-drived its way into our very hearts. Those are the lamest puns ever.
I'm gonna kick your ass.
Today's soundtrack, in case you didn't know, is all about Street Fighter III Third Strike and the mastermind behind it who brought jazz to the Capcom sound team in one fell swoop, Hideki Okugawa. Okay, so in my opinion, Okugawa is like the video game music composer version of Batman. There's barely any information on Homeboy, and he is just like poof, gone. It's like magic. Trying to find information on Okugawa is like, where are you? Here. Now, although there is paper-thin information about Okugawa, there is information about him that is quite interesting, so stay tuned. According to the Capcom Wikia, Okugawa is renowned for spearheading the jazz component to Capcom's sound team, as I mentioned earlier before. At the same time, he also introduced elements of jungle style, acid jazz, and drum and bass. Most of the research I've been looking into has stated that Third Strike is Okugawa's first solo soundtrack, even though he's done various Capcom game OSTs pairing up with different members of the Capcom sound crew. So Okugawa has been noted on games such as Darkstalkers, Resident Evil 5, Mega Man The Power Battles, and oh my god, X-Men Children of the Atom. Remember that game, guys? Now with Street Fighter III Third Strike, I don't know where to start. One of the things that this game has going for it, in terms of music, is that it has 3 different versions of its own soundtrack. The arcade version, the arranged version, and when Third Strike Online Edition came out, freelance video game music composer Simon Viklund offered his talents and created the Online Edition remix of the entire soundtrack. And we're going to dive into each version of the soundtracks and tell you exactly why each one of them is unique in their own way, and why you can listen to all of them and it's still a fresh experience in listening to this killer soundtrack. See, when Third Strike came out in the arcades, I'm guessing that Okugawa had to work with the sound system that was optimized with the hardware at the time. So while the original soundtrack for Third Strike has this badass, acid, jazzy, trippy, hip-hop drum-based dopeness, it had this old-school synthesizer sound to it that, to me, almost sounds like it's on purpose. There's something about the griminess of the tracks that just makes it dirty. Like, dirty. Joining Okugawa on the soundtrack is Toronto-based rapper Infinite, who not only did the announcer tracks for the entire game, but also offered a couple of songs on the soundtrack which don't sound intrusive at all. In fact, it adds to the experience of the whole thing. Third Strike, done by Infinite, is the song that starts off the whole game. It quite literally gives you the idea of wait a minute, this is unlike any Street Fighter game I've ever played before. His song sets up the premise for the entire soundtrack, and it's really cool how it's done. When Third Strike finally hit the home consoles, if you explore the options, you'll see that you'll be able to change the way that the soundtrack sounds. You have a choice between the arcade version and the arranged version, which on the surface does sound like the same soundtrack. There's totally some high quality changes to the arranged OST. Things sound crisper and cleaner, less noise in the background. And some of the tracks, while keeping the same melodies, actually don't really sound the same. For example, take Urien's theme, Crazy Chili Dog. The arcade soundtrack had a brilliant way of transitioning into the first and second round remix that surprised first-time players and kept returning brawlers amped up because they knew what was coming, and because the soundtrack was so awesome, it just added to the flavor of the match. For example, listen to the arcade version of Ryu's theme, Kobu. Notice how it takes Okugawa's love of Japanism elements like the taiko drums. And then when the second round starts, all of a sudden, rock elements, drums and bass intensify the tension in the moment in the round 2 mix. Yet the arranged soundtrack adds a third round mix into the experience. It really just signifies the tension that is there, because now you and your opponent are at a standoff. A prime example of this is with Remy's theme, The Beep. Take a listen. Both soundtracks are really amazing to listen to, and not just because of the composition. It's because both soundtracks have their own unique style to them. The low quality yet grungy feeling of the arcade version versus the arranged soundtrack, which adds crisper, cleaner sound with third round remixes that are just an amazing addition just to have. Now again, when Street Fighter 3 Third Strike Online Edition came out, the soundtrack took a different curve when Simon Viklund was brought on to make the online remixes of the original OST, and there have been some mixed opinions about his work. The online edition soundtrack takes a full 180 on the OST and introduces some new, fresh elements that only Viklund can provide. It's part of his style, part of his charm. Now, even I have to admit, I had a rough time listening to Viklund's remixes of a soundtrack that I just grew up with and got attached to. But it did eventually warm up to me. It was another version of a soundtrack that was just golden to begin with. Viklund's rendition, like the arcade version, has both a first round and second round remix. I for one really dig Viklund's take on Snowland, which is Necro and 12's theme, and the Longshoreman, which belongs to Sean and Oro.
Now in terms of Okugawa's style in Third Strike, you can hear the drums and bass. Bass is super heavy on this soundtrack. Twilight, Ibuki's theme, and Crowded Street, Young and Yang's theme can literally bring down the house with their bass track. Turn it up on some subwoofers, and it's so good. Okugawa combos you with elements of soul, funk, a little bit of disco, rock, and Japanese instruments like the taiko drums and the shakuhachi flute. And those dirty, dirty drum tracks, man.
The drum tracks are too dirty. Too dirty.
Other instruments include the turntables, synthesizers, the saxophone, pianos, acoustic and electric guitars, strings, and organs.
Let's talk about some top tracks on the soundtrack. For me personally, one of my favorite tracks on here has got to be Q's theme, named Q. And my favorite version of Q's theme goes down to the original arcade version. It's one of those tracks that just has an element of mystery to it. And it's got this great melody, and it's got this great bridge, and that second round remix is just king. You just get right into the groove of it. Q's theme is no joke.
The same goes for Killing Moon, which is Akuma's theme. No matter who's fighting on that stage, when this track hits, the match is on. This track is so killer because the shakuhachi flute is prominent in the melody, and it's wickedly used along with a badass spliced and mixed drum track, strings, and if you listen very closely, there's an organ as well.
No matter which version of the soundtrack you're listening to, the arcade, the arranged, the online edition, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike's soundtrack is boss. Combined with Okugawa's love for Japanism elements and introducing jazz and rock, drum and bass to Capcom's sound team, teaming up with Infinite and letting Simon Viklund ride the reins on the online edition soundtrack, I guess you can technically say that Third Strike's the charm, right? No! Other than that, I got nothing else to say but well done, Okugawa. Okugawa-san, come back to the fighting game genre and make a new soundtrack for Capcom because you slay.
The Third Strike, y'all, is Street Fighter 3.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Arcadio. If you like this episode, do give it a thumbs up because it really helps this guy out. Now I do have yet another question for you guys. What's your favorite track from Third Strike? What's your favorite version of the soundtrack from Third Strike? Are you a fan of the arcade, the arranged, or the online edition version? Do you have another Street Fighter game other than Third Strike where you thought the soundtrack was the best? Let's get the discussion going on in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts. And be sure to subscribe to Arcadio so that way you can get the notification on when the next episode or another one of my crazy antics winds up popping up. Until next time, I'm DJ BK Mr. Arcadio. Deuces.
Now, find a new rival. We await your return, warrior.